Eli Preston had learned to read a room long before most children learned to read books. When you cannot speak, you watch. You notice. You see the small things that talking people miss because they are too busy filling silence with noise. Right now, every alien in the diplomatic hall was terrified, though they were all trying very hard to pretend otherwise. The insect-like Chirathi delegates kept their antennae perfectly still, which Eli had learned meant they were forcing themselves to stay calm. The crystalline lumini dimmed and brightened in irregular patterns like a heartbeat that could not quite steady itself. The amphibious Drell sat with their webbed hands folded, but Eli could see the slight tremor in their fingers. Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat beside Eli in the observation gallery, watching the debate below through the transparent floor. She had been his guardian and translator since he was 7 years old. She understood his sign language, his gestures, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. Most importantly, she trusted him when he said he could feel what others were feeling. Eli typed into his neural interface, and the words appeared on a floating screen beside his head. They are going to run. All of them. They will vote to evacuate their home systems and leave the outer colonies to die. Dr. Tanaka read his words and sighed. Can you blame them? The Void territories have swallowed 17 systems in 3 months. No weapons work against those ships. Every species that has tried to fight back has lost everything. Eli shook his head. He typed again. Running will not save them. Whatever is coming from the Void, it follows. It hunts, I can feel it even from here. Like something watching us through a crack in reality. Dr. Tanaka shivered despite the comfortable temperature of the observation deck. Eli had always been sensitive to things others could not perceive. When he was younger, doctors had called it hyper-awareness, a compensation for his inability to speak. But as he grew older, it had become something more. He could sense emotional currents between people, predict conflicts before they happened, feel danger before it arrived. That was why Earth had sent him as their diplomatic observer. Not in spite of his silence, but because of it. While other diplomats talked and argued and made speeches, Eli listened to the things beneath the words. He felt the truth that voices tried to hide. Below them, a Chirathi admiral was clicking and buzzing in their language, translated into everyone's native tongue by the station's systems. We must consolidate our forces, pull back to defendable positions. We cannot protect everyone. A Lumine elder, glowing bright orange with anger, responded, You mean abandon the frontier worlds? Let millions die while we hide behind our core systems. Better millions than billions, the Chirathi shot back. Eli felt the fear spike in the room below. It was not the clean fear of soldiers before battle. It was the messy, desperate fear of people who knew they were choosing between terrible options and worse ones. They were all waiting for someone to offer them hope, but nobody had any to give. The debate continued for another hour, going in circles. Eli watched and felt the resignation settling over the delegates like a heavy blanket. They would vote to retreat. They would abandon the outer territories, and whatever was coming from the Void would consume those abandoned worlds and grow stronger. Then something changed. Eli felt it before he saw it. The air in the observation gallery suddenly felt thicker, harder to breathe. Dr. Tanaka gasped and grabbed his arm. Eli, do you feel that? He nodded. Every instinct he had was screaming danger. Not the kind of danger that came from weapons or violence, but something deeper, something wrong with reality itself. Alarms started blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed. The delegates below jumped to their feet, looking around in confusion. Through the transparent floor, Eli could see space outside the station, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Reality was tearing. There was no other way to describe it. Space itself was ripping open like fabric, and through the tear, darkness poured out. Not the darkness of empty space, but a darkness that seemed alive and hungry. It moved like smoke, like oil, like something that existed in too many dimensions at once. Ships emerged from the tear. They were not built. They were not mechanical. They looked grown, organic, wrong. Their shapes hurt to look at. Angles that should not exist. Surfaces that seemed to fold in on themselves. The station shuddered as defense systems activated. Eli watched through the windows as the combined fleet of the Galactic Council moved to intercept. The Chirathi ships went first, their weapons blazing. Energy beams and missiles streaked toward the dark vessels. Nothing happened. The weapons passed through the enemy ships like they were not even there. Or worse, like the weapons themselves ceased to exist the moment they touched that impossible darkness. Then the dark ships fired back. Except it was not firing, not really. They simply moved close to the galactic ships, and where they touched, matter dissolved. Hulls crumbled. Energy shields popped like soap bubbles. 47 Chirathi warships disintegrated in less than a minute. Panic exploded through the diplomatic hall below. Delegates were screaming, running for the exits. The Luminae were flashing in distress patterns. The Drell were croaking their alarm calls. Even the usually stoic Chirathi were fleeing in disorder. Eli felt all of it crashing into him like a wave. 53 species, all feeling the same primal terror at once. The sensation was overwhelming. His neural interface sparked and flickered, overwhelmed by his racing thoughts. Dr. Tanaka was pulling at him, trying to get him to move, to run, to escape. But Eli could not move. Because he felt something else. Something that was not terror or panic or despair. It was ancient and vast and patient. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks, like the breath before a scream, like the pause between heartbeats. Something was coming. Not from the void, from somewhere else. The wall in front of Eli became translucent, then transparent, then simply was not there anymore. He should have been terrified. Air should have been rushing out into space. But the laws of physics seemed to have taken a break in this particular spot. She came through the wall as if it were made of mist. A creature so large that Eli's mind struggled to comprehend her scale, serpentine and graceful, covered in scales that shifted through colors that had no names, wings that seemed to exist in multiple places at once, cutting through dimensions rather than through air. A dragon, an actual impossible mythological dragon. Her eyes found Eli immediately, as if she had come here specifically to find him. They were crystalline and ancient and held an intelligence that made him feel like a child looking up at the night sky for the first time. When she spoke, every translator in the station failed. But somehow, impossibly, Eli understood her. Not with his ears, with something deeper. You. Silverstream said, her voice resonating in his bones, his blood, his soul. The quiet one. The one who hears what others cannot. I have been searching for you. Dr. Tanaka stood frozen, her mouth open, unable to process what she was seeing. Below in the diplomatic hall, delegates had stopped running. They were all staring up at the dragon in shock and awe. The darkness you see is called the Unmakers, Silverstream continued, her gaze never leaving Eli. They existed before time, before space, before thought itself. They hunger for existence, and they will devour everything unless someone stops them. Eli's hands trembled over his neural interface. He tried to type, but the device was still malfunctioning from the emotional overload. He could not ask the questions screaming in his mind. Silverstream seemed to understand anyway. My kind fought them once long ago. We learned that they feed on declarations, on assertions, on the sound of existence proclaiming itself. So we fell silent, we hid. We became myths so we might survive. The dragon moved closer, her massive head now filling Eli's entire field of vision. But silence has a price. We cannot warn, cannot teach, cannot lead, unless we find someone who already knows the power of unspoken words. Her claw, carved from light and impossible angles, reached through the non-existent wall and touched Eli's chest directly over his heart. Someone who speaks without sound. Someone who understands that the deepest truths need no voice. Eli felt something unlock inside him, a door he never knew existed, opening to reveal rooms beyond counting. He suddenly understood languages he had never learned, felt connections to minds he had never met, perceived dimensions of communication that existed beneath words, beneath sound, beneath even thought. Eli Preston, Silverstream whispered, and hearing his name in her voice felt like being truly seen for the first time in his life. Son of Earth, keeper of quiet words. Will you learn what we have to teach? Will you become the voice that speaks in silence? Will you show the galaxy how to fight without feeding the darkness? For 16 years, Eli had been unable to speak. His throat had never formed the sounds. His vocal cords had never vibrated. He had lived his entire life in silence. Now, with a dragon's claw touching his heart and the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, Eli felt something building in his chest. Not words, not sound. Something deeper and truer than language had ever been. He looked into Silverstream's ancient eyes and nodded once. The dragon's expression, alien as it was, somehow conveyed both relief and sorrow. Then we begin. But know this, young one. The path ahead will cost you everything. Your comfort, your safety, perhaps even your life. She pulled back slightly, her scales shimmering with colors that spoke of battles fought before stars were born. But if you succeed, you will give the galaxy something it has never known. A way to unite without words. A way to fight without feeding the enemy. A way to be heard without making a sound. Eli's neural interface finally flickered back to life. His fingers moved across the controls, typing 3 simple words that appeared in glowing text beside his head. Teach me everything. Everything went white, then black, then colors Eli had no words for because they existed outside the spectrum his human eyes were meant to see. When his vision cleared, he was no longer on the station. He stood on a platform of crystallized light that hung suspended in a void that somehow felt alive and aware. Dr. Tanaka was gone. The diplomatic hall was gone. The attacking ships and the terrified delegates were all gone. For a moment, pure panic seized Eli. His neural interface was not working here. He had no way to communicate at all. He was more alone than he had ever been. Then he realized he was not alone. Dragons circled in the distance, dozens of them. Hundreds, perhaps. Some looked like they were carved from frozen music. Others appeared to be constructed from the spaces between stars. A few seemed to exist only partially in this dimension, their forms flickering in and out of reality. Silverstream materialized beside him, smaller now, only about the size of a large shuttle. In this strange place, her voice came to him not through his ears but through his mind. Do not be afraid. Your body still sits on the station. This is a place between thoughts, where we can speak without the Unmaker's hearing. Eli's hands moved automatically to type before remembering his interface did not work. The frustration must have shown on his face because suddenly, impossibly, words began to appear in the air around him, not typed, not spoken. They simply formed from his thoughts themselves, glowing like captured starlight. Why me? What makes me special? Nothing, said a new voice, and another dragon approached. This one had scales like stained glass windows showing battles Eli could not understand. I am Thornweaver. I keep the memories of what was. And you, Eli Preston, are not special. You are necessary. There is a difference. A third dragon descended, wrapped in controlled lightning that never quite touched its scales. I am Stormwhisper. I guard the borders between possible and impossible. What Thornweaver means is that we do not need you, because you have powers others lack. We need you because you learned lessons others never had to learn. Eli's thoughts crystallized into words faster now. He was beginning to understand how this place worked. What lessons? How to communicate without making noise, Silverstream explained. Most beings learn language as children. They learn to speak, to write, to transmit data. These methods all have one thing in common. They leave traces. They can be heard, seen, intercepted, corrupted. Thornweaver's tail swept through the void and images appeared. Eli watched memories that were not his own. Dragons breathing fire that could ignite suns. Dragons roaring with voices that could reshape the fabric of space itself. Dragons singing songs that wove new laws of physics into being. We were magnificent, Thornweaver said softly. We shaped the universe with our words. Every declaration we made became reality. We were living gods, the images changed. Now Eli saw the darkness. The same hungry nothing that had poured from the rift at the station. He watched it consume dragon after dragon, drawn to their power like moths to a flame that burned with malicious intelligence. The Unmakers fed on our declarations. Stormwhisper continued. Every time we proclaimed our strength, we became beacons for them. Every time we announced our presence, we gave them a path to follow. They learned the sound of our voices and made weapons from that knowledge. The memories showed dragons falling silent one by one, retreating, hiding, becoming whispers and legends and myths. We thought silence would save us, Silverstream said. And it did. But it also imprisoned us. We cannot warn the younger races without drawing the Unmakers to them. We cannot teach without speaking. We cannot lead without declaring our presence. Eli watched as the dragons scattered across the universe, each one alone, each one silent, each one slowly fading from memory until they were nothing but stories parents told their children. Until you, his thoughts formed. You stayed quiet for so long that you forgot how to communicate without words. Exactly, Thornweaver said, and there was approval in the ancient dragon's tone. We are creatures of declaration by nature. Silence for us is not peace. It is suffocation. But you, young human, you grew up in silence. You never learned to depend on voice as your primary tool. How do you communicate? Eli's thoughts asked. Right now, I mean. How are we talking without the Unmaker's hearing? Silverstream moved closer, her crystalline eyes studying him with an intensity that felt like being read on a fundamental level. We're using what we call the language beneath language. It exists in the space between intention and expression. When you think of warmth and someone else feels warm without you saying anything, that is a word in this language. When you experience fear and others sense danger without you warning them, that is a sentence. I do that sometimes, Eli realized. When I was little and got lost, I remember feeling scared so strongly that Dr. Tanaka found me even though I couldn't call for help. She said she just knew I needed her. Yes, Storm Whisper rumbled. You have been using this language your entire life without knowing it had a name. Most beings have this ability buried deep within them, covered over by layers of learned communication. But for you, it was never buried. It was all you had. The void around them suddenly filled with light. Eli saw networks spreading out in all directions. Connections between minds, between species, between thoughts themselves. It looked like the neural pathways of some vast cosmic brain. This, Silverstream gestured with a wing that seemed to slice through multiple dimensions, is what the universe looks like when you see through the language beneath language. Every conscious being is connected, whether they know it or not. Thoughts ripple through these connections like waves through water. The Unmakers cannot follow these connections, Eli's thoughts asked. They can sense the effects, Thornweaver explained, but they cannot trace the connections themselves because the language beneath language does not exist in a dimension they can perceive. They feed on declaration, on assertion, on the act of imposing meaning onto reality. But this language simply recognizes meaning that already exists. Eli stared at the vast network of light. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. If I learn this language, if I teach it to others, we could coordinate without transmissions. We could share information without data streams. We could fight without battle cries. Yes, Silverstream confirmed. But there is a cost. To speak this language to billions of minds at once, you would need to open yourself to billions of minds. You would feel their fear, their pain, their joy, their death. Everything they experience would pour through you like you were a living conduit. The dragon's form flickered, becoming more transparent. And eventually the Unmakers would notice you, not because they could follow the language itself, but because they would see its effects. Ships moving in perfect coordination without commands, planets evacuating without panic, fleets fighting with impossible unity. They would know someone was orchestrating it, and they would search until they found you. You said this might destroy me, Eli thought, remembering her words from the station. This is what you meant, partially, Storm Whisper said. The other danger is simpler. The human brain was not designed to be a relay for galactic consciousness. The neural load alone could kill you. Your mind could fragment under the weight of so many simultaneous connections. You could lose yourself in the sea of other people's thoughts and never find your way back. Why are you telling me all this? Eli asked. Why give me a choice if the galaxy needs this so badly? The three dragons exchanged glances, a gesture that felt painfully human despite their alien forms. Because we made the mistake of not choosing, Silverstream said quietly. We were born with power and we used it without thinking about consequences. We fought the Unmakers with strength and volume and pride, and it nearly destroyed us. We will not make that mistake with you, Thornweaver added. You must choose this path knowing what it costs. Otherwise the choice is meaningless. Eli looked down at his hands, at the thought form of his body in the space between dimensions. He thought about Dr. Tanaka, who had spent years learning to understand him. About his parents, who never treated his silence as something broken. About Earth, which looked at him and decided he was exactly what they needed to represent them to the stars. He thought about the terrified delegates fleeing from the Unmakers. About the 47 Chirathi ships that had disintegrated in seconds. About the 17 systems already consumed by the darkness. How long do I have to decide? Minutes, Storm Whisper said bluntly. In real time, only seconds have passed since we brought you here. But the station is under attack. If we do not act soon, Harmony's edge will fall, and with it the council that could coordinate the galaxy's defense. Eli's thoughts swirled with questions and fears and doubts. But beneath all of that there was something solid and certain. He had spent 16 years being unable to speak. 16 years watching people talk past each other, missing what really mattered because they were too focused on words. 16 years learning that communication ran deeper than language. If the galaxy was going to survive, it needed to learn the lesson he already knew. Teach me, his thoughts formed clearly. I will do it. I will be your voice. Or your silence. Whatever you need. Silverstream's eyes blazed with something that might have been joy or might have been grief. Then we begin. But first you must understand the most important truth. The language beneath language requires authenticity. You cannot use it while hiding from yourself. You must know your own voice before you can teach others to find theirs. I do not have a voice, Eli pointed out. That is the whole problem. You have a voice, Thornweaver corrected gently. You simply never learned to use it. But the language beneath language does not work if you remain split between silence and speech. You must claim both. You must speak your own name in your own voice, imperfect as it may be. Terror shot through Eli. I cannot. I have tried. The sounds do not come out right. My throat does not work correctly. It does not need to be right, Storm Whisper said. It needs to be yours. Perfect does not matter, true does. The language beneath language recognizes authenticity above all else. If you teach the galaxy to communicate while denying your own ability to speak, you teach them that silence is the goal. But silence is not the goal. Understanding is. You want me to speak, Eli thought, and the fear in his thoughts was palpable. After 16 years of silence, you want me to make sounds I do not know how to make. We want you to try, Silverstream said softly, because trying is what makes you human. Dragons were born perfect and powerful. We never had to struggle. We never had to overcome limitation. That was our weakness. She moved until her massive head was level with his small thought form. You have spent your life overcoming. That is your strength. And when you speak your name for the first time, when you claim your voice no matter how broken it sounds, you will show the galaxy what we dragons forgot. That weakness embraced and overcome is stronger than power that was simply given. Eli felt himself being pulled back toward his body, toward reality, toward the burning station, and the war that waited. The dragon's presences pressed around him, supportive but insistent. Say your name. Silverstream's final whisper followed him into the dark. Speak it aloud when you wake, and then you will speak for us all. Reality crashed back into Eli like a physical blow. His lungs burned. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every nerve ending in his body was screaming that something fundamental had changed. Like waking up with new limbs he did not know how to use. Dr. Tanaka was dragging him down the corridor, her face streaked with tears. Her mouth was moving, shouting something, but Eli could not hear her words. Not because of the alarms blaring throughout the station, but because he was hearing something else entirely. Fear. Pure, distilled terror from every living being on Harmony's edge. It poured into him like water through a broken dam. 17,000 souls, all convinced they were about to die. And Eli could feel every single one of them. The sensation was overwhelming, crushing, impossible to process. His neural interface sparked and flickered, overloaded by his racing thoughts. He tried to type something, anything, to tell Dr. Tanaka what was happening to him, but his fingers would not obey. They trembled uselessly over the controls. Through the corridor windows, Eli saw one of the Unmaker vessels approaching. This close, it looked even more wrong than before. Its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ship's edges were indistinct, like someone had cut a hole in reality and the darkness underneath was leaking through. A Chirathi cruiser moved to intercept, firing everything it had. Energy beams, missiles, plasma charges. The weapons looked impressive, painting space with brilliant colors. Then they touched the Unmaker vessel and simply stopped existing. Not destroyed. Not deflected. They ceased to be, as if they had never been fired at all. The Unmaker vessel drifted closer to the Chirathi cruiser and touched it gently, almost tenderly. Where they made contact, the cruiser began to dissolve. Hull plating crumbled to dust. Energy conduits flickered and died. In seconds, 800 crew members ceased to exist. Their screams cut off before they could even begin. Eli felt all 800 deaths. Each one was a thread of connection that suddenly snapped, leaving raw edges that burned through his consciousness. He stumbled, nearly falling, but Dr. Tanaka caught him. Eli, we have to keep moving, she shouted, her voice finally breaking through the overwhelming sensory input. The evacuation shuttles are leaving in 3 minutes. But Eli could not move. The deaths had triggered something in him, something the dragons had unlocked. He was suddenly aware of every mind on the station with crystalline clarity, not just aware of them, connected to them. He could feel the Chirathi admiral in the command center trying desperately to coordinate a defense he knew was hopeless. He could feel the Lumini children in the civilian quarters crying for their parents. He could feel the human engineers in the maintenance sections, frantically trying to keep life support running for just a few more minutes. And he could feel something else. A pattern in the chaos. A way through the terror. If they would just stop broadcasting their fear so loudly, stop announcing their presence with every panicked transmission, the unmakers might lose track of them long enough to escape. Eli opened his mouth. His throat felt full of broken glass. His tongue did not know which way to move. For 16 years he had been silent. Now, with a dragon's magic burning in his chest and 17,000 lives hanging in the balance, he needed to speak. Eh. The sound that came out was barely recognizable as language. It hurt. Every muscle in his throat was screaming at him to stop. But he pushed forward, forcing the syllables out one by one. Hey, Lee. Preston. Dr. Tanaka froze, staring at him with wide eyes. Eli? My name is Eli Preston. Each word felt like pushing a boulder uphill, but they came. Rough, broken, barely understandable, but his. And I speak for the dragons. The effect was immediate and shocking. Every being on Harmony's edge felt his words. Not heard them through their ears or their translators. Felt them, deep in whatever part of consciousness exists beneath thought. In the command center, Admiral Rutherford of Earth's fleet suddenly understood with perfect clarity what needed to be done. In the civilian quarters, parents felt a wave of calm wash over their children's terror. In the maintenance sections, engineers found themselves working in sudden, perfect coordination without needing to speak. Silverstream materialized in the corridor beside Eli, her form visible to everyone now. Dr. Tanaka gasped and stumbled backward, but Eli reached out and caught her hand. Through their touch, he shared his certainty. This is not an enemy. This is our only hope. Well done, voice-bearer, Silverstream said, and this time everyone could understand her, each in their own way. Now comes the true test. You have claimed your voice. Now you must teach them to surrender theirs. The dragon's presence expanded, filling the corridor with light that somehow cast no shadows. Her voice resonated through the station, not through speakers, but through the same deep channel Eli had just used. People of Harmony's Edge, cease your transmissions. End your broadcasts. Stop declaring your existence to the void. In the command center, Admiral Rutherford hesitated only a moment before cutting all external communications. No more hails, no more distress signals, no more attempts to coordinate with the fleet. The station's beacon, which had been screaming their location to anyone listening, went silent. One by one, the other species followed. The Chirathi stopped their clicking coordination signals. The Lumini dimmed their light-based communication pulses. The Drell ceased their sonar mapping of nearby space. Eli felt the station falling silent, not in defeat but in unified purpose. Through the windows, he watched the Unmaker vessel slow its approach. Without the constant noise of proclaimed existence, it seemed confused, like a predator that had suddenly lost the scent of its prey. Now, Silverstream's voice was barely a whisper in their minds. Connect them. Eli understood what she meant, even though the thought terrified him. He reached out with his consciousness, grasping those 17,000 threads of awareness he could feel scattered across the station. Not to control them, not to command them, just to open pathways between them. The Chirathi admiral suddenly felt the tactical assessment of the Lumini science officer as clearly as if it were his own thought. The human engineer understood the spatial calculations of the Drell navigator without a single word being exchanged. The Lumini teacher experienced the protective instinct of the Chirathi soldier guarding the civilian quarters. Harmony's Edge stopped being 17,000 separate beings trying to survive alone. It became something else, something new. A unified consciousness where information flowed freely, where fear was shared and therefore diminished, where 17,000 minds worked as one without losing their individual identity. The defense fleet moved with impossible coordination. Ships that should have needed minutes of communication protocols to align their tactics did so in seconds. Each captain knowing instinctively what the others were planning, weapons fired in perfect synchronization without targeting data being shared. Shield harmonics aligned into a unified barrier without a single engineer discussing the mathematics. To the unmaker vessel, Harmony's edge simply vanished from perception. It had been a bright beacon of proclaimed existence, thousands of voices shouting, "We are here, we matter, we exist." Now it was nothing. A void that matched the unmaker's own nature. The predator could not find prey that had learned to become invisible by embracing silence. The vessel hesitated, its impossible geometry shifting as if confused. That hesitation was all Silverstream needed. She moved through dimensions Eli's human eyes could not quite track, existing in multiple places simultaneously. When she struck the unmaker vessel, it was not with physical force but with concentrated meaning. "Here," she declared with a voice that bypassed sound entirely. "Reality is stronger than your absence. Existence trumps void." The vessel made a sound that was not a sound. It was anti-noise, the sensation of hearing screaming while deaf. Then it began to collapse inward, feeding on itself, consuming its own absence until nothing remained but a faint distortion in space that quickly faded. The other unmaker vessels around the station paused. For a moment Eli feared they would swarm, overwhelming even the dragon's power, but instead they retreated. They pulled back toward the rift they had emerged from, moving with synchronized purpose that suggested a hive mind making a collective decision. The rift sealed, space shuddered and healed itself, reality reasserting its dominance over the tear that should never have existed. Eli's legs gave out. He collapsed to the deck, every muscle in his body trembling with exhaustion. Dr. Tanaka caught him before his head could hit the floor, cradling him like she had when he was 7 and she had first become his guardian. "You spoke," she kept saying through her tears. "Eli, you actually spoke." But Eli barely heard her. He was still connected to those 17,000 minds, feeling their shock, their relief, their dawning understanding of what they had just experienced. They had fought the unmakers not with weapons or shields or tactics, but with silence, with unity, with a form of communication so old and so fundamental that the darkness could not consume it, and they understood without needing to be told that this was only the beginning. Silverstream's form began to fade, her presence in the physical world becoming less solid, but her voice remained clear in Eli's exhausted mind. "You have bought them time, voice-bearer. Days, perhaps weeks. The unmakers will return with greater numbers, and next time they will be prepared for silence. You cannot maintain this connection indefinitely. You will need to teach others to do what you have done." How? Eli's thought was barely coherent. His mind stretched thin from the effort of connecting so many consciousnesses. "I can barely hold this together now. How can I teach billions to do the same?" "You will not teach billions," Silverstream corrected gently. "You will teach thousands. They will teach millions. Those millions will teach billions." The language beneath language spreads like ripples in water, each touch creating new connections. The dragon's presence faded further, becoming almost transparent. "Rest now. When you wake, the real work begins. You must show them not how to fight the unmakers, but how to be unfightable, how to exist without declaring, how to unite without commanding, how to speak without feeding the darkness." "I do not know if I can," Eli admitted. "This almost killed me, and it was only 17,000 minds. How can I possibly—" "You will not do it alone," Silverstream interrupted. "You have already taught them the first lesson. Now they will help you teach the rest. That is what makes humanity special, young voice-bearer. You understand that weakness shared becomes strength." The last of the dragon's presence evaporated like morning mist. The connections Eli had forged between the 17,000 minds on Harmony's edge remained, but they were no longer flowing through him. They had learned to maintain the pathways themselves, teacher becoming students, one mind teaching another how to connect without words. Eli finally let himself sink into unconsciousness, Dr. Tanaka's arms holding him safe. His last thought before darkness claimed him was simple and clear. "We won this battle, but the war has just begun." 3 days after the battle, Eli stood in what the station crew called the quiet room. It was a chamber at the heart of Harmony's edge where all electronic systems had been shut down, all ambient noise eliminated, all possible distractions removed. 1,700 beings from the 53 species of the Galactic Council sat in complete silence, waiting for him to teach them what he had taught their stations and ships during the attack. Eli's voice still hurt to use. Every word felt like dragging stones across raw flesh. But he had discovered that speaking aloud, imperfect as his speech was, somehow anchored the language beneath language. It gave the wordless communication a foundation in physical reality. The unmakers cannot see silence, he said slowly, each syllable carefully formed. They can only see declaration. When you broadcast, when you announce, when you proclaim your existence, you become visible to them. Through the neural interface that Dr. Tanaka had repaired for him, additional text appeared beside his words for those who struggled to understand his rough speech. But Eli was learning that the text mattered less than the meaning beneath it. When he spoke through the language beneath language, perfect pronunciation was irrelevant. Ambassador Ren of the Kirathi raised one antenna in question. In the silence, his gesture was loud as a shout. Eli felt the question before words formed. How do we fight an enemy we cannot see if we ourselves cannot be seen? We do not fight them, Eli explained and reached out with his consciousness to touch Ren's mind gently. With permission this time, with respect. We make ourselves indigestible. He shared the memory Silverstream had given him, the ancient dragon wars where his kind had learned too late that power announced became power consumed. The Chirathi delegate experienced it as if it were his own memory, felt the terror of being hunted by something that fed on the very act of existence. Watch, Eli said to the assembled delegates. He reached out to Dr. Tanaka, who sat closest to him, and opened a connection between their minds. Suddenly she felt what he felt, the presence of every consciousness in the room, each one unique, each one a note in a vast symphony waiting to be heard. Dr. Tanaka gasped and reached out instinctively to the delegate beside her, a lumine named Brightthread. The connection spread. Brightthread touched the mind of a Drell engineer, the engineer connected to a Chirathi soldier. Within minutes, all 1,700 delegates were linked in a web of shared consciousness. But it was different from the desperate connection Eli had forged during the battle. This time, nobody was drowning in the collective awareness, each being maintained their sense of self, while simultaneously experiencing the thoughts and feelings of those around them. It was like being in a room full of friends where everyone understood each other perfectly, without needing to explain. This is the foundation, Eli said, his voice carrying not just through sound but through the connections themselves. When we connect like this, we do not need transmissions. We do not need to broadcast our intentions. We simply share understanding. A human admiral named Sarah Worth sent a thought rippling through the network. But surely the unmakers will notice the effect of this connection. Ships moving in perfect coordination. Planets evacuating without chaos. They will know something is organizing the defense. Yes, Eli admitted. They will know. But they will not be able to follow the connections themselves. The language beneath language exists in a dimension they cannot perceive. They will see the results but not the cause, like trying to fight an enemy who can only see shadows and never the thing casting them. What happens when they adapt? The thought came from Luminous, the same elder who had argued against retreat before the attack. They are intelligent, predatory. They will find a way to counter this eventually. Eli felt Silverstream's presence before he saw her. The dragon materialized in the center of the quiet room, her form somehow small enough to fit in the space while still feeling vast and ancient. The delegates who had not seen her during the battle reacted with shock, fear, awe. But the connections between minds held steady, and those who had seen her before shared their certainty. This is an ally. This is a teacher. The unmakers have already begun adapting. Silverstream confirmed, her voice resonating through both sound and thought simultaneously. Our scouts have detected new movement in the void territories. They are gathering, consolidating. In 3 weeks, they will launch their true assault. 12 simultaneous rifts across the galaxy, each one pouring forth darkness in numbers that will make their first attack seem like a gentle test. The fear that rippled through the network was palpable, threatening to shatter the fragile connections. Eli felt it building like a wave and acted on instinct. He shared his own fear, his own certainty of inadequacy, his own terror at the impossible task ahead. And in sharing it honestly, he showed them that fear was not weakness. Fear acknowledged and shared was just information. The wave of panic subsided. The connections held. We have 3 weeks, Eli said, to teach this to billions. We cannot reach everyone, but we can reach enough. How? The question came from dozens of minds simultaneously. How can we possibly train billions of beings in 3 weeks? Exponential growth, Dr. Tanaka spoke up, her voice confident despite the impossible odds. Each of you will return to your homeworlds and teach 100 others. Those 100 will each teach 100 more. Within 2 weeks, we will have trained millions. By the time the Unmakers return, we will have networks spanning entire sectors. Thornweaver materialized beside Silverstream, his stained glass scales showing battles from before the current civilizations existed. But teaching is not enough. You must also unlearn. Every species here has cultural practices built on declaration, on announcement, on making yourselves known. You must abandon those practices during times of crisis. A Chirathi military commander sent a troubled thought through the network. Our entire tactical doctrine is based on coordination through transmitted commands. Our ships rely on constant communication to maintain formation and share targeting data. Without that, we cannot fight effectively. You can, Eli said gently, and shared his memory of the defense fleet during the first attack. Ships moving in perfect synchronization without a single transmission. Each captain knowing what the others would do because they felt it directly. You will fight more effectively, but you must trust the connection more than you trust your protocols. Storm Whisper arrived with a crack of controlled lightning, his presence making the air in the quiet room feel charged and alive. The language beneath language requires vulnerability. You must open your minds to each other, share your fears and weaknesses, trust that others will not exploit what you reveal. This goes against every survival instinct evolved into conscious beings. That is why it works, Eli realized, the thought forming clearly through his connection to the dragons. The Unmakers are predators. They think like predators. They expect prey to hide, to armor themselves, to protect their weaknesses. They do not expect prey to share those weaknesses openly, to make strength from collective vulnerability. Precisely, Silverstream said, and her approval warmed through the network like sunlight. Humans have a saying, united we stand, divided we fall. The Unmaker's entire strategy depends on division, on isolating prey, making each species believe they face the darkness alone. But you are teaching the galaxy something we dragons learned too late, that the opposite of alone is not just together, it is unified. Eli felt the shift in the network as understanding crystallized across 1,700 minds simultaneously. They were not just learning a technique. They were learning a philosophy, a way of existing that ran counter to millions of years of evolutionary programming. We will need trainers, Admiral Worth said, beings who can teach others to open these connections. It cannot just be Eli. One person, even connected to billions, cannot maintain that kind of load. I can teach you to be trainers, Eli offered. The connection I am holding now between all of you is not that difficult once you understand the principle. It is like learning to swim. Terrifying until you realize the water will hold you up if you let it. He spent the next 6 hours teaching them, not through lectures or demonstrations, but through direct sharing of experience. Each delegate felt what it was like to open a connection, to maintain it, to help others find their own pathway into the network. Some learned quickly, their minds naturally suited to this form of communication. Others struggled, too dependent on vocal language to easily grasp wordless meaning. But all of them learned, because the alternative was extinction, and fear is a powerful teacher when channeled into purpose rather than panic. By the time the session ended, Eli was trembling with exhaustion. Maintaining connection to 1,700 minds for 6 hours had drained him in ways sleep could not easily restore. Dr. Tanaka caught him as he stumbled, her presence in the network shifting from student to caretaker. You cannot keep doing this, she said softly as she helped him toward the medical bay. You will burn yourself out before the Unmakers even return. I know, Eli admitted. His voice was barely a whisper now, his throat raw from hours of speaking. But I just need to hold on long enough. Once the network is established, once enough people understand how to maintain the connections themselves, I can step back. Silverstream walked beside them, her form translucent now, less solidly present in physical reality. There is something else you must know, voice bearer. When the true assault comes, you will need to make a choice. You can be a node in the network, one voice among billions, maintaining your own safety, or you can be the foundation, the central point that holds everything together when fear threatens to tear it apart. The dragon's crystalline eyes met his. If you choose to be the foundation, the strain will likely kill you. Your human brain was not designed to channel the consciousness of billions. You will feel every death, every loss, every moment of pain across 12 battlefronts simultaneously. It may shatter your mind beyond any hope of recovery. Eli felt Dr. Tanaka's grip on his arm tighten, felt her fear and love and desperate hope that he would choose to save himself. But he also felt the presence of 1,700 delegates, spreading out across the galaxy, each one carrying the knowledge he had given them, each one preparing to teach others, each one building pieces of a network that just might save countless lives. I will make that choice when the time comes, Eli said quietly. Right now, I just need to make sure there is a network strong enough to survive without me. Because if I am the only thing holding it together, then I have not really taught them anything. Silverstream nodded slowly, something like respect in her ancient gaze. Wise beyond your years, voice-bearer. But wisdom will not make the choice easier when the moment arrives. 3 weeks. That was all the time they had. 3 weeks to teach a galaxy to be silent. 3 weeks to build a network strong enough to survive the coming storm. 3 weeks to prepare for a war unlike any in history. Eli closed his eyes as Dr. Tanaka settled him into a medical bed, exhaustion finally overwhelming his determination. His last conscious thought was a question he could not answer. When the moment comes, will I have the courage to be the foundation, or will I choose to survive and watch the network crumble without me? 21 days after the first attack, Eli stood in the central nexus chamber surrounded by 300 of the galaxy's most skilled consciousness trainers. Through the vast windows of Harmony's Edge, he could see the assembled defense fleet. Thousands of ships from 53 species, all waiting in complete silence. No running lights, no identification beacons, no communication chatter. They hung in space like stars that had forgotten how to shine. The network was active now, spanning 40 billion minds across the galaxy. Eli could feel it humming at the edges of his consciousness like a second heartbeat. Not everyone was connected yet. That would come when crisis forced them to reach for help. But the pathways were there waiting, a nervous system for an entire civilization. Through those pathways, Eli felt the fear building. The Unmakers were coming. Every species with any kind of long-range detection could see the rifts beginning to form. 12 tiers in reality, spread across the galaxy in a pattern that suggested intelligence and malice in equal measure. How long? Admiral Worth asked from her position at the tactical station. 7 minutes until the first rift opens fully, Dr. Tanaka reported, reading data from sensors that would need to go silent the moment the enemy emerged. 15 minutes until all 12 are active. Eli closed his eyes and let himself sink into the network. 40 billion minds, each one a point of light in an endless web of connection. He could feel the lumini on their crystal worlds, preparing to dim themselves into invisibility. The Chirathi fleets aligning without commands, each captain knowing their position through shared understanding. The Drell families evacuating to underground shelters, coordinating through wordless agreement rather than panicked announcements. And he could feel the others, the ones who had become essential to the network's survival. Beings from every species who, like him, had lived their lives outside the normal channels of communication, a deaf lumini who had always perceived the world through vibration rather than light. A Chirathi born without the ability to produce the clicks and buzzes of their language. A human girl who had never learned to speak due to a neurological condition, but had spent her life reading emotions in faces and bodies. They were the foundation now. Not just Eli. Thousands of beings who had already learned to communicate without sound, who understood instinctively that meaning transcended medium. They held the network stable, each one supporting a piece of the vast structure. The first rift tore open on the edge of Chirathi space. Through the network, Eli felt 17 billion Chirathi minds react with instinctive fear, but the fear did not cascade into panic. It flowed through the network, acknowledged and shared, and therefore diminished. What one person could not bear alone, 17 billion could carry together. The Unmaker vessels poured through. Thousands of them, each one a whole in reality given purpose and direction. They moved with coordinated intelligence, spreading out to consume everything in their path. The Chirathi fleet waited in absolute silence. No power signatures, no engine emissions, no transmitted orders. They had learned to hide not by running or cloaking, but by simply ceasing to announce their existence. To the Unmakers, the fleet might as well have been empty space. The dark vessels moved past the hidden fleet, searching for prey that had vanished from their perception. Then Silverstream and her dragons struck. They came from angles that should not have existed, moving through dimensions the Unmakers could not follow. Where dragons touched the void ships, reality reasserted itself with violent force. Darkness solidified and shattered, but there were too many. Even the dragons, ancient and powerful as they were, could not destroy thousands of vessels in time to prevent them from reaching inhabited worlds. The Unmakers adapted quickly, learning to spread out so they could not all be attacked at once. Second rift opening, Dr. Tanaka announced. Lumini space. Third rift, fourth, Eli, they are all coming through at once. Eli felt the galaxy convulse with fear as 12 simultaneous invasions began. Telendris, the Lumini homeworld, went dark as 10,000 years of continuous light broadcasting ceased in an instant. They were hiding, making themselves invisible, but the Unmakers had learned from the first battle. They began destroying space randomly, collapsing stars and shattering planets without bothering to search for targets. If we cannot see you, their actions screamed, we will destroy everything until nothing remains to hide. Eli felt the network tremble, 40 billion minds experiencing helpless terror as worlds began to die. The connection started to fray, fear overwhelming the fragile trust that held the network together. Eli. Silverstream's voice cut through his consciousness. They need you to hold them. The network is failing. This was the moment, the choice the dragon had warned him about. He could maintain his position here, safe in the Nexus chamber, supporting the network without bearing its full weight. Or he could become the foundation, the central point through which all 40 billion connections flowed, holding everything together through sheer force of will. The first option would let him survive. The second would almost certainly kill him. Eli thought about Dr. Tanaka, who had spent 16 years learning to understand him. About his parents on Earth waiting for news. About the life he might have if he chose to protect himself. Then he thought about the Chirathi families hiding in their hive cities, feeling the foundations shake as Unmaker vessels tore apart their star. About the Luminite children crying in the darkness their people had chosen as camouflage. About the 40 billion beings who had trusted him, learned from him, opened themselves to vulnerability because he had promised them it would save them. Eli opened himself completely. He reached out through the network and pulled every thread of consciousness into himself, becoming the hub through which all understanding flowed. The sensation was like being hit by a tsunami of pure awareness. 40 billion minds, each one unique, each one terrified, all pouring their fear and hope and determination through him simultaneously. His body convulsed. Dr. Tanaka screamed his name, reaching for him, but he was already beyond physical sensation. He existed now in the network itself, a living conduit for galactic consciousness. Through 40 billion eyes, he saw the 12 battlefronts. Through 40 billion hearts, he felt the terror of worlds dying. Through 40 billion minds, he experienced the impossible strain of maintaining hope when darkness consumed everything. And through his own consciousness, spread impossibly thin across all those connections, he sent a single message, a memory, a feeling, the moment when he had first spoken his name, claiming his voice despite 16 years of silence. The feeling of overcoming limitation through pure determination. You are not alone. His message rippled through 40 billion minds. And together we are stronger than the void. The effect was immediate. The network stabilized. Fear remained, but it no longer threatened to tear the connections apart. 40 billion beings felt each other's presence and drew strength from the shared burden. On 12 battlefronts, the tide began to turn, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through something the Unmakers could not understand. The ships and stations and worlds they were trying to destroy were no longer separate targets. They had become one organism, coordinating without commands, sharing resources without negotiation, fighting without battle cries. The Lumini remembered Silverstream's teaching. They stopped trying to hide and instead did something the Unmakers had never experienced. They projected meaning directly at the void ships, memories of beauty, of love, of the joy of existence. They forced the darkness to feel what it was trying to destroy. The Unmaker vessels began to solidify. Reality poured into them like poison, giving definition to things that were never meant to have form. They shattered, exploding into fragments of crystallized void matter that dissolved slowly back into normal space. The Chirathi did the same, sharing their memories of community, of the hive mind that had evolved to protect and nurture. The Drell projected their connection to their homeworld's oceans. The humans shared their stubborn refusal to give up even when logic said defeat was certain. 40 billion beings unified through Eli's connection became a weapon made of meaning itself. They did not fight the Unmakers with force. They fought them with existence, with the assertion that reality mattered. that consciousness had value, that the universe was better with life than without it. But the cost was devastating. Eli felt every death on every battlefield as if it were his own. A Chirathi pilot whose ship was consumed, a Lumine family caught in a collapsing city, a human colony that did not receive the warning in time. Each death was a thread of connection severing, leaving raw wounds across his consciousness. He was dying. He knew it with absolute certainty. His brain was not designed to channel this much awareness. His neurons were firing in patterns that should have killed him already. Only the network itself was keeping him alive, 40 billion minds lending him their strength even as he gave them his. Eli, you have to let go. Dr. Tanaka's voice cut through the noise, her presence in the network blazing with desperate love. The network can survive without you now. They have learned. You do not need to hold it anymore. But Eli could feel the truth. The network was strong, yes, but the unmakers were learning too. They had started targeting the consciousness trainers, the beings who held the network stable. If he let go now, if he stepped back before the foundations were truly secure, the entire structure would collapse. Just a little longer, he whispered, his physical voice barely audible in the Nexus chamber, just until they understand they can hold it themselves. He felt Silverstream's presence beside him, the dragon's consciousness merging with his own. Then let me help you carry it, voice-bearer. You taught the galaxy to share burdens. Now let me share yours. The other dragons joined her, Thornweaver, Stormwhisper, dozens of ancient beings who had lived through countless wars. They wove themselves into the network, taking threads of connection from Eli's overstrained consciousness, not replacing him but supporting him, sharing the weight, and then something miraculous happened. The consciousness trainers across the galaxy, the thousands of beings who had become the network's foundation, they reached out to Eli. They took threads from him. They shared the load, a deaf Lumine here, a mute Chirathi there, a human girl who had never spoken, all of them understanding what needed to be done. Eli felt the weight lift. He was still connected, still part of the network, but no longer holding it together alone. The network had matured beyond needing a single hub. It had become truly distributed, truly galactic, 40 billion minds supporting each other in an endless web of shared understanding. On 12 battlefronts, the last unmaker vessels solidified and shattered. The rifts began to close, reality healing itself like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. The darkness retreated beyond the edge of existence, beaten not by superior force but by something it had never encountered before. Unity that required no declaration. Communication that left no trace. Existence that refused to be consumed because it had learned to exist without announcing itself. Eli collapsed. The network released him gently, carefully, all 40 billion minds touching his consciousness one last time in gratitude before letting him go. He felt Dr. Tanaka catch him, felt her tears on his face, felt her desperate certainty that he was dying. Maybe he was. His body was not responding. His heartbeat was irregular. His brain activity spiked and crashed in patterns that made no medical sense. But he felt strangely peaceful. He had done what needed doing. The galaxy had learned its lesson. "Stay with me," Dr. Tanaka begged. "Eli, please. You taught us to connect. Do not leave us now." Eli tried to speak, but his newly claimed voice had abandoned him again. The strain had been too much. His throat would not form sounds anymore. He was back where he started, silent and exhausted. But he managed to reach up and touch Dr. Tanaka's face. Through that touch, he sent his final message through the language beneath language, not words, just feeling, love, gratitude, pride in what they had accomplished together, and hope, because the network would survive. The galaxy had learned to hear each other. Eli woke 3 days later in the medical bay, his body wrapped in more monitoring equipment than seemed reasonable for one person. Dr. Tanaka sat beside his bed, her head resting on her arms, asleep from exhaustion. Through the window, Eli could see the fleet still assembled around Harmony's edge. Though many ships had begun the journey home to assess damage and rebuild what had been lost, he tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body screamed protest. His head felt like someone had taken it apart and put it back together slightly wrong. When he tried to speak, to call Dr. Tanaka's name, nothing came out. His voice was gone again, stolen by the strain of channeling 40 billion minds. But something else remained. Eli could still feel the network. Not actively. Not the overwhelming flood of consciousness he had experienced during the battle. It was quieter now, gentler, like background music in a peaceful room. 40 billion minds going about their lives, no longer unified in crisis, but still connected in small ways. A Tirathi remembering a conversation and feeling their friend's response without needing to call them. A Lumini parent sensing their child's need before they asked for help. A human couple understanding each other without words after years of practice. The network had not disappeared when the crisis ended. It had simply become normal, natural, the way things were supposed to be. Dr. Tanaka stirred and lifted her head. Her eyes widened when she saw Eli awake. "Oh, thank everything," she breathed, reaching for his hand. "The doctors said you might never wake up. Your brain activity was so erratic they could not predict anything." Eli squeezed her hand and reached for the neural interface on the bedside table. Dr. Tanaka helped him strap it on, her fingers shaking slightly. He typed slowly, his thoughts still sluggish and confused. "How long was I out?" 3 days. The battle ended 72 hours ago." Dr. Tanaka's voice was thick with emotion. "The Unmakers retreated. The rifts are sealed. The galaxy survived because of you, Eli. Because you were willing to be the foundation when no one else could." "Did we win?" "Yes, well, mostly. We lost 11 worlds completely. The Unmakers consumed them before we could evacuate. Another 37 suffered major damage. Total casualties are estimated at 43 million across all species." Dr. Tanaka's expression crumpled. "But without the network, without what you taught us, it would have been billions. Entire civilizations gone." Eli closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 43 million deaths even through the memory of them. He had felt each one during the battle, each severed thread of connection burning through his consciousness. They were why his voice was gone now, why his body felt broken, why thinking was like walking through thick mud. "The Council wants to honor you," Dr. Tanaka continued. "Every species is proposing awards, ceremonies, statues. The humans want to name a starship after you. The Tirathi are composing a battle song in your honor. The Lumine created a light sculpture that supposedly captures your essence." Eli typed quickly. "No. Please no. I did not do this for recognition, I know. But Eli, you need to understand what you have accomplished. You did not just save lives. You changed the entire galaxy. The network is still active. People are still connected. They are using the language beneath language for everything now. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, family communications. You taught the galaxy a new way to exist." Through the window, Eli saw Silverstream approaching. The dragon moved through space as if it were water, her scales catching starlight and transforming it into colors that should not exist. She phased through the station's hull as if it were not there and materialized in the medical bay. Her form shrunk to merely the size of a large vehicle. "Voice-bearer," Silverstream greeted him. Her presence in his mind was gentle, respectful of his exhausted state. "You survived. I confess I did not think you would. No mortal mind should have been able to channel what you channeled." Eli typed on his interface. "I had help. The trainers took much of the load, and you dragons supported the foundations. I just held on." "You did far more than hold on," Thornweaver said, materializing beside Silverstream. "You showed the galaxy what we dragons forgot in our pride. That strength shared is not strength divided, but strength multiplied." Stormwhisper appeared last, his lightning-wreathed form crackling with barely contained energy. "The Unmakers have retreated beyond the edge of reality. They will return eventually. That is their nature. But they have learned that this galaxy is no longer easy prey. They will think twice before attempting another assault. Will the network be enough next time?" Eli typed. "When they come back with new strategies, new adaptations?" "Perhaps," Silverstream said honestly. "Perhaps not. But you have given the galaxy something more valuable than a weapon. You have given them understanding. The 53 species of the Council are no longer strangers who happen to share space. They are connected. They know each other. They feel each other's joy and pain." The dragon moved closer, her crystalline eyes studying Eli with an intensity that felt like being read at a molecular level. "Wars between Council species have already decreased by 70%. Trade has increased. Cultural exchange programs are being proposed. The network you built in desperation is becoming the foundation of a true galactic civilization. There is something else you should know," Dr. Tanaka said quietly. "The beings like you, the ones who could not speak or hear or communicate through traditional means, they are being celebrated now, not pitied, not seen as disabled or broken. The galaxy recognizes that they were practicing the language beneath language all along. They are the new ambassadors, the new teachers, the new leaders. A young Lumine phased through the wall, her light dim in a way that suggested a birth defect. She had never been able to shine brightly like her kind usually did. Through the network, Eli felt her gratitude and awe. She thought spoke to him directly without words. You showed me I was not less. You showed me I was different, and that different could be powerful. Thank you. More came. A Chirathi who could not produce their species' clicking sounds. A Drell born without sonar. A human man who had lost his hearing in an accident. A dozen beings, then 100, all connected to the network, all sharing their gratitude with Eli directly. For the first time in his life, Eli felt truly seen. Not as the human who could not speak, not as the disadvantaged boy who needed accommodation, but as someone whose difference had saved a galaxy. The Council has made a decision, Admiral Worth said, entering the medical bay with a delegation of ambassadors from various species. We are establishing the Silent Academy, a school where beings from all species can learn the language beneath language, not just for crisis communication but for everyday life, for art, for music, for poetry expressed without sound. Ambassador Wren stepped forward, his antennae dipping in the Chirathi gesture of deep respect. We want you to lead it, Eli Preston. To teach others what you taught us. To ensure that the next generation grows up connected, understanding that communication runs deeper than words. Eli stared at them, then at his neural interface. Slowly he typed, I cannot, my body is broken. My voice is gone again. I can barely maintain the connection to the network anymore. How can I teach anyone when I can barely function myself? Because you understand the lesson better than anyone, Silverstream said gently. You know that weakness acknowledged becomes strength. That limitation accepted becomes adaptation. That silence can speak louder than any shout. The dragon's presence wrapped around him like a warm blanket. And you will not do it alone. The trainers will help. The other silent ones will help. Dr. Tanaka will help. You built a network, voice bearer. Now let that network support you. Eli looked at Dr. Tanaka, at the assembled ambassadors, at the young beings who saw him as proof that their differences mattered. He felt the network humming at the edges of his awareness. 40 billion minds all living their lives but still connected in small, meaningful ways. He thought about the boy he had been 16 years ago, unable to speak, certain he would never matter to anyone. He thought about the teenager Earth had sent to the stars, chosen specifically because of his silence rather than in spite of it. He thought about the moment Silverstream had whispered his name and everything had changed. Maybe he was broken. Maybe his body would never fully recover. Maybe his voice was gone forever. But the language beneath language did not require a working voice. It required truth, vulnerability, and the courage to connect. Slowly, painfully, Eli nodded. He typed on his interface. I will teach them, not because I am strong, but because I understand what it means to be weak. Not because I can speak, but because I learned that silence has its own voice. Not because I am special, but because every conscious being is connected, and connection is the truest form of speech. The relief and joy that rippled through the room, through the network, through 40 billion minds across the galaxy was palpable. They had found their teacher. Not a warrior or a diplomat or a powerful voice. Just a boy who had learned that the deepest truths need no sound. Silverstream touched her snout gently to Eli's forehead. Then we will leave you to heal, voice bearer. But know this, the dragons will remain. We will no longer hide in myth and legend. This galaxy has learned our lesson, and we can finally speak again without feeding the darkness. Because of you, Thornweaver added, we remembered what we had forgotten. That silence and voice are not opposites. They are partners, two parts of the same language. Rest now, Stormwhisper said. When you are ready, your students will be waiting, and the galaxy will be listening. The dragons faded from physical reality, returning to whatever dimension they called home. The ambassadors left one by one, each pausing to touch Eli's hand or share a moment of connection through the network. Soon it was just Eli and Dr. Tanaka again, sitting in the quiet medical bay while the galaxy continued its slow process of healing. You did it, Dr. Tanaka said softly. You spoke without speaking. You connected without commanding. You saved us all by teaching us to save ourselves. Eli managed a weak smile and typed one final message before exhaustion claimed him again. I learned it from everyone who ever tried to understand me. From you most of all. You taught me that communication is not about making noise. It is about making meaning. Thank you for seeing me when I could not make myself heard." Dr. Tanaka cried then, quiet tears that she did not try to hide. She held his hand and sent her own message through the network, wordless and pure. Love, pride, gratitude for the privilege of knowing him. Eli closed his eyes and let himself drift. The network hummed around him like a lullaby sung by 40 billion voices that made no sound. He could feel the Chirathi rebuilding their hive cities, working in perfect coordination without needing to discuss plans. He could sense the Lumini creating new art forms that expressed meaning, through shared emotion rather than light. He could perceive the humans writing poetry that existed only in the connections between minds, never needing to be spoken or written down. The galaxy had changed, not because he had forced them to change, but because he had shown them what they could become, what they had always been capable of becoming, if only they stopped talking long enough to truly listen. Somewhere in the void territories beyond the sealed rifts the Unmakers waited. They would return someday. That was certain. But when they came, they would find a galaxy that had learned to be invisible by being connected. A civilization that had discovered strength in vulnerability. Worlds that could unite without declaring their unity. And if Eli was still alive when that day came, he would be ready. Not as a warrior or a hero or a voice speaking for billions. Just as a teacher, showing others what he had learned from a lifetime of silence. That sometimes the bravest thing you can say is nothing at all, and sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that whispers beneath words. In the language every conscious being speaks, but few remember how to hear. The language beneath language. The silent symphony. The quiet that roars louder than any proclamation. Eli Preston, the boy who could not speak, had taught the galaxy how to truly communicate. And in doing so, he had found his own voice in the spaces between sound and the connections between hearts and the understanding that transcends all words. He had spoken when a dragon whispered his name. And the entire universe had learned to listen.